Most problems in the garden can be traced back to incorrect watering, either not enough water or too much. Water is a valuable resource, so it is very important to get this one right. And in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how I water the trees and plants and shrubs in my yard using drip irrigation, and how I set up and use the garden grids from Garden in Minutes to water my garden beds. But if we haven't met before, my name's Angela from Growing in the Garden, and I love to share garden inspiration and helpful tips so you can be successful in your own garden. The existing drip system in my yard is over 20 years old and is definitely not set up to water efficiently. There are just a few zones for watering all the plants and shrubs in my yard. For many of those lines, the old poly tubing was leaking and it had multiple repairs through the years. Since I've moved in, I've also added several garden beds and fruit trees to my yard. I've had the garden grid set up to hoses and hose bibs, and that has worked fine, but I've had a lot of issues with dead timers, broken timers, me forgetting to change the timer. So I really wanted to have all my garden grids set up to my main watering system so I could control it from my phone and really manage and use water efficiently. As my garden expanded, we have gotten rid of almost all of our grass. I have 5 kids, 2 that are now married, and we use our yard and enjoy the turf area. But in my efforts to use water more efficiently, we decided to change that grass into artificial turf. A video on that will be coming soon. So it's time to redo our existing irrigation system and replace it with something that meets our current needs. So here's my plan. I would like one line for trees in the front yard and another line for trees in the backyard. Same thing for shrubs. One line for the front yard, one line for the backyard. Another line for annuals in the ground and also containers. I'd love to be able to not have to hand water quite as much. And finally, a few irrigation lines going to the many garden beds that I have in my garden areas. So I hired Derek with Blu Sprinkler Company to make this happen. Derek and his team at Blu Sprinkler kept me informed about each part of the process and worked until we got things just right. The best part, once they were done, I couldn't even tell that they were there. The rocks and everything were put back in place and all cleaned up. Blu Sprinkler added new valves with a filter and a pressure regulator all in one unit. Filters have a mesh screen to prevent debris from going down the line and clogging the emitters. The pressure regulator in each valve is going to determine how much pressure gets put out into the yard. On the drip zones, they used 40 psi to push the water right through to the end of the zone with lots of pressure. They added flex pipe for all of the drip lines. Then they wired all of those valves into my existing Rachio control panel. I don't have the easiest yard for this installation. I have a lot of plants and a lot of beds, and they were really patient as they ran all of these lines, and it got pretty complicated with lots of different lines going through different areas. Everything is set up and runs exactly how they told me it would. So I'll explain a little bit more about each of the different types of zones. The tree line runs around the entire front yard, and then another one runs around the backyard. The trees have different emitters, whether they're desert adapted or citrus. The number of emitters is determined by their size, and they can be moved out a bit as the trees grow. The shrubs have a similar setup. There is a zone for the front yard and a zone for the backyard. The shrubs are similar to the trees in that the plants that need more water will have 4-gallon-per-hour emitters, whereas the desert shrubs will have 2-gallon-per-hour emitters, or some of the desert landscaping won't have any emitters at all. They have already become established and do not require extra water. The annual line is one of the parts I'm most excited about. This is those parts of my yard in the in-ground beds that need more water than the existing trees and shrubs. But if I wanted water to go to them, I had to hand water. So I'm really excited to have this line for the annuals that I switch in and out of my in-ground areas. So I can really control the amount of water and the frequency that I water these in-ground areas. So for the annual line, it has emitters It's not spaghetti line that I'm going to accidentally cut when I am digging and putting a new plant in. So I can see exactly where it is and move it out of the way if I need to as I'm planting, but I can also see exactly where that water is going to come out, and so I can place plants right along where the water comes out. The annual line also sends an additional line into each one of my whiskey barrels, and they have the built-in emitter tubing in a ring around them. I'll still keep my oyas in there, but it is nice to know they're getting watered and I won't have to hand water or fill up the oyas as often. And finally, the best part, they connected all of my garden grids for all of my garden beds into the watering system. Garden grids from Garden in Minutes are amazing. They are the only way that I water my raised beds. They water the beds quickly, efficiently. They even divide the bed into square foot gardening for me. So I love using them. Garden in Minutes is also coming out with a line of metal garden beds with the garden grids. So excited to try those out. Because all of those grids water so quickly, it can get tricky to get enough water flow going into each one of the beds. So they started off using the flex pipe and running that to each of the beds, but there was not enough water pressure. So ultimately, what Derek and the team at Blu Sprinklers decided to do was to run 3/4 inch PVC to each individual bed and then tap off of that line with the flex pipe. This ensured that there was plenty of water flow from the first bed all the way to the last one. By eliminating the pressure regulator and using the 3/4 inch PVC pipe, it increased the water pressure and the water flow, so there was enough water to meet the demands of several garden grids hooked up on one zone. Each bed also has an inline ball valve to adjust the flow into the bed. If you don't have as many beds as I do, it is simple to run a hose to each grid. There's even an included adapter. But if you have a lot of beds like I do, getting the water to the beds can be complicated. That's the hardest part. Once you've got the water there, assembling the grids and adding them to your beds couldn't be easier. This is how we do it. Lay the grid out on the bed. Make sure that that connector piece that connects to your watering system is where you want it to be. Lay it all out, make sure everything looks right, and then put those grids together. Next, you're going to attach the grid to the flex pipe or your poly tubing or to your hose. It comes with adapters for your hose, so that part is really simple. If you are connecting it to something else, you may need different adapters. I love using these inline ball valves to adjust the pressure to each bed. If I have a bed full of garlic or onions that I need to turn off for a week or two before I harvest, it makes it really easy to turn the water off to one particular bed. Now that everything is done, I can manage everything from my phone. It makes it really easy to turn them off if it rains, even if we're out of town. So now I'm going to spend some time determining how long to water each zone. Landscape trees need to be watered to a depth of 3 feet, most shrubs to a depth of 2 feet, and annual plants and my garden beds to about 1 foot. Once I've determined how long to run the zones for, that's how long I'll run them each time that I water. But what's going to change is the frequency, or how often that I water my garden. During the cooler months of fall and into winter, the frequency is going to be much, much less. I may only water my garden beds about once a week and trees and shrubs about once a month if we don't get any rain. During the summer, during the hottest, driest months of the year, I may water my garden beds as often as every other day, and my landscape trees and shrubs maybe even once a week. Pay attention to the soil and to your plants as you determine how much and how often to water. A soil probe can be helpful to see how deep the water is penetrating. It can take some time to get this right. Watering correctly not only saves water, but it makes your plants healthier and happier too. Thank you so much for watching.